I feel so close to you right now, it's a force field. I wear my heart up on my sleeve like a big deal. Your love pours down on me, surround me like a waterfall. And there's no stopping us right now. I feel so close.
Okay, I just had a sneeze attack, so if I sneeze crazy in the middle of this, I apologize. But so we know that the president has enumerated powers that are outlined in the Constitution, but over time we definitely have seen that presidents have expanded those powers and also sort of inherited new powers. We often see a parallel of expansion of presidential power with the expansion of the United States as a world power. And also, presidents who have had strong leadership skills have gained more authority for the office of the president. And there's a couple different ways in which this has happened. So as the executive branch has expanded, and we will talk about the cabinet in just a second, as the president's closest advisors, as the number of those people has grown, then the number of people whom he has authority over has grown as well. Presidents in modern times have faced different crises, and being a leader during times of crises often sort of, again, inherently gives the leader of that situation more power. So one of the roles the president plays is to act as chief executive. He presides over the administration of the government. So basically, picture the president as being the CEO of a ginormous company, okay? So there's always one boss, and then there's sometimes a few, a dozen, hundreds, in this case, thousands of people who are working for this company, and the president is in charge of them. Today, the federal bureaucracy spends about $3 trillion a year and numbers more than 4 million employees. So that is, again, a huge company. The president obviously is not going to be able to handpick or possibly even meet all of those people, but they essentially would say, the president is my boss. I work for the president of the United States. The president does, however, get to appoint about 500 high-level positions. Again, he probably won't have time or the resources to interview and meet all of those people, but he gets to appoint some of them, and then his staff and other staffers will sort of vet the people for those positions. And then the president also has 2,500 people in lesser jobs that, again, would essentially call him their boss. Okay, so what does the vice president do? What's his job? Constitutionally, there really is only one job, and that is to preside over the Senate. What that looks like in real life is that the president would cast the vote and if there were a tie. And I think I've mentioned this before, because there are 100 senators, there always is the opportunity to have a tie, and so the vice president would then be called in to break a tie. This actually doesn't happen as often as you might think it would. Going back to George W. Bush's administration, I believe his vice president, Dick Cheney, did cast tie-breaking votes on like 6 or 7 times, but other than that, it is kind of a rarity. Now, if you watch House of Cards, you know that the vice president presiding over the Senate was way more dramatic in that series. Okay, you know I can't get through a presentation without mentioning House of Cards. And then we've seen more recently that presidents have involved their vice presidents in more policy discussions and important diplomatic decisions. A lot of people probably think that the president and the vice president are good friends or that they work together often, but actually the right-hand person to the president, and it's typically been a man, is the president's chief of staff, and then additional or other cabinet members. The vice president and the president sort of have pretty separate paths that they are working on, but we have seen them working more collaboratively in recent times. Oh, quick note, I want to go back. If you guys remember, which you may or may not, after the 12th Amendment, which resulted as after the election of 1803, it put separate ballots for vice president and president to run on tickets together, because back in the day, the vice president would be whichever candidate finished with the second most votes. And so what that would look like if we did not have the 12th Amendment is Barack Obama would be the president, and then Mitt Romney would have been his vice president. So you can imagine how much work got done in that case. So the cabinet. The cabinet has 14 secretaries of different departments and then also the attorney general. So when we say the executive branch, we are talking about the president and then those 15 people. They are his advisors. They are actually not mentioned in the Constitution. They didn't exist yet. But since George Washington, there have been cabinet members. It is impossible to expect one person to understand all goings on around the world in terms of economic, political, diplomatic issues. And so the president needs people who can kind of go do the research and groundwork for him and report back to him. There have been different positions added to the cabinet over time. I think during Congress I mentioned that the original Secretary of Defense was actually Secretary of War, and so that's changed. And then the most recent addition to the cabinet was the Secretary of Homeland Security. Other cabinet level advisors who do not specifically count as cabinet members include the President's Chief of Staff, the U.S. Trade Representative, our ambassador to the UN, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the heads of EPA, OMB, and Small Business Administration. So these are the people who are probably deemed to be experts, have a lot of experience, background, understanding of their certain areas. And then they report to the president. And oftentimes when they report, they sort of tell the president, this is what we're going to do, and then kind of leave it hanging in the air like that. And then the president would say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. But we're going to watch an episode of The West Wing, which you will see that oftentimes people report to the president as like, this is what we're going to do unless you tell me no. And that's really out of necessity because there's no way for the president to be everywhere to understand everything. So he needs a lot of people to help him. This shows the different cabinet departments and the order we've seen before in terms of presidential succession. And again, these are in order of when they were added to the cabinet. And so it's interesting. If there were a catastrophe where we got all the way through presidential succession, it's funny. I probably would feel even most comfortable having the Secretary of Homeland Security serve as president because that person would probably know how to get through whatever catastrophe led us to climb all the way through all of these people. And again, these cabinets, or these departments rather, in the cabinet, they're going to have their full staffs, but the secretary is going to be the one person who is in the president's cabinet. So another, I guess, part of the executive branch would be the executive office, which was established in 1939, and it's made up of a few different councils or groups that are, again, going to be staffed and made up of many different people. And each one of these three specializes in a particular area of government, and then they would present their findings, their knowledge, their expertise to the president, and then the president would have the last say. So, for example, there's a National Security Council, which is going to be staffed by foreign and military policy advisors who either have experience in one of those two areas, they're experts in those areas, and then they would do reports, and then they would brief the president. Same thing in the Council of Economic Advisors and the Office of Management and Budget. And it's in that Office of Management and Budget where the president's proposal for a budget is prepared, and then the president would be the one to present this budget to Congress for congressional approval. The White House staff is really the group of people whom the president works most often and closest with on a daily basis. And again, his right-hand aide is going to be his chief of staff. There are other aides. There's one person's job who is the scheduler of the president. He's going to have many different administrative assistants. He's going to have a deputy chief of staff, so an assistant to the president. Again, watching shows like West Wing and House of Cards, you're going to get an idea of who those people are. A director of communications, the press secretary, all of those people are part of the White House staff, who again are going to be the people who work with the president every single day. They are much closer to the president than the cabinet. The cabinet often are appointees who are selected maybe for more political reasons than the president is really good friends with them or trusts them. The cabinet often is going to have signs of bipartisanship, meaning that a Democratic president would put a few Republicans in cabinet positions just to give the illusion of bipartisanship. Oftentimes, cabinet positions are often appointed or assigned to someone from a minority. And so, for example, we could say, oh, Barack Obama has a Latino secretary of this. I would have to go back and look for certain to give examples of that, but the cabinet positions tend to be more grounds based on political reasons rather than, okay, who do I trust, who is loyal, who would I be okay with, having to work with on a daily basis. The White House staff is not approved by the Senate. They're simply handpicked by the president. So again, he's going to pick people to put in those positions whom he trusts and can work with and cooperate with the most. All right, another role is chief legislator. We've talked about vetoes and pocket vetoes and signing a bill to law. That's pretty powerful stuff. He can also propose and advocate legislation. Keep note that it doesn't say he can write legislation or, again, sponsor legislation, but he can kind of influence through words and through, just different spheres of influence to hopefully have the legislators write the law. He can call Congress into special session. Again, hey, there's a federal government shutdown and thousands of people are without work. Get your butts to Congress and get this taken care of. He is also considered the party leader, and that is political party leader. So whatever the president's agenda is going to reflect on all members of the party. So for example, Barack Obama, one of his main platforms was affordable health care for all Americans. So then that became a platform for all Democrats. Healthcare, important. He can lobby for legislative support. Again, because he can't write this, he has to figure out other ways to influence the authors of legislation. So he can, again, in his State of the Union address to Congress, talk about what he would like to see Congress do and put the heat on them. He can go to different events where they are advocating for a certain policy. And then he can help party members get elected. So if the president shows up to support a candidate, then that, just because of the sheer attention, might garner a lot of votes. So, I'm in the 4th district and I have 2 candidates. Who am I going to pick? If the president of the United States shows up to endorse one of those candidates, that candidate is probably going to get a lot of votes because the president is supporting him or her. So as chief diplomat, the president can negotiate treaties with other countries. However, the checks and balances, the Senate needs to vote 2/3 to approve the treaty. There are sort of loopholes and ways around this. The president can use executive agreements to take care of routine matters with other countries. So what this means is executive agreements really give the president a lot of power, but for a limited time. So executive agreements in terms of authority are equivalent to treaties and laws, but they are only valid for as long as that president is in office. So for example, if President Obama enacts an executive agreement to send troops somewhere, when a new president would take over, that president can opt to continue the agreement. There would have to be new paperwork filed, but then those troops would be sent back or whatever the details were. And executive agreements do not require Senate approval. So it's because of these executive agreements that a lot of times people, how do I say this? So Congress has the power to declare war. The president cannot declare war. However, the president can enact an executive agreement to send troops somewhere. So when we talk about the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, we call those wars, but Congress has actually not officially declared war since World War II. But we are engaged in battle and something that looks like war, but it just hasn't been called that. But the reason why we have been in that is because there have been executive agreements issued. The president may also negotiate for peace between other countries. And this often would include inviting leaders from those respective countries to the White House or to Camp David, the presidential retreat, and then negotiate or act as a mediator between those two to hopefully settle peace. The writers of the Constitution originally wanted civilians to control the military. I don't know how I feel about that, but thankfully, the enumerated powers have established that the president acts as the commander-in-chief. So he is also the boss of the military. And this is important. This signs up? No, it shows up on tests. So the War Powers Resolution, this was a law passed in 1973 that requires presidents to consult with Congress whenever possible prior to using military force and to withdraw forces after 60 days unless Congress declares war or grants an extension.